Welcome, everyone. My name is Ahmed. I am Palestinian from Gaza, and I am living or dialing in today from the stolen land of Gadigal people. I'd like to welcome you all to this session that is titled, This is Palestine, Resistance, Truth-Telling, and Survival in a Time of Genocide. A conversation with a brilliant Palestinian figure. This webinar is hosted by Free Palestine Melbourne and Palestine Justice Movement Sydney. And before I introduce our special guest today, I must acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are dialing in from today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. This land was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land like Palestine. This land is a ground zero of a genocide that occurred more than 200 years ago, and its echoes still reverberate to our day. I am dialing in from Camaragal country. I am, again, delighted to be joined today in a conversation with Diana Buttu. Diana is a Palestinian Canadian lawyer, analyst, and former legal advisor to the Palestinian Liberation Organization PLO. Her brilliant podcast series, This is Palestine, is produced by the Institute of Middle East Understanding and highlights the daily struggle of Palestinians, including interviews with Palestinian student activists, Palestinians who were used as human shields by the Israeli regime, and torture camp survivors. It brings stories from the ground in Palestine and speaking with experts and activists to bring unique perspectives and analysis about Palestine from across the world. Please follow the podcast. It's incredibly educational. It's called This is Palestine. This is also part of the title of today's conversation. Diana, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ahmed. I have to say I appreciate the fact that you begin with a land acknowledgement. I too want to acknowledge that I'm sitting in Haifa, which is occupied Palestinian land. And I think that that's very important for people to continue to keep in mind, but not just as a land and acknowledgement, but to continue to strive to make sure that that we undo the injustices of the past. So thank you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. It's really my honor and pleasure to be in conversation with you today. You know, when two Palestinians get together these days, it's really hard not to talk about what's happening back home at the moment. I mean, over a year into this genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people in Gaza, you know, the state of Israel is showing no sign of reining in its atrocious onslaught. I mean, one can argue this is actually not limited to Gaza. I mean, looking at the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation on human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, Francesca Albanese has just issued her new report in conjunction with the 79th session of the General Assembly titled Genocide as Colonial Erasure. And the report expands the analysis to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and shows how Israel is actually committing genocide against Palestinians throughout the entirety of the occupied territory that it controls. You know, with a complete impunity and unconditional military support and political support from the US, UK, Australia, Germany, and other Western imperialist powers, Israel's genocidal campaign is now expanding into Lebanon and has the potential of triggering a full-out war with Iran, with the inability of the international law to hold Israel to account and end this genocide and onslaught. Now more than ever, the Palestinian struggle for liberation is at a critical juncture, I think, and the risk of Israel achieving a complete victory and reshaping the entire region haunts the imagination of millions. And it's a scary thought, something that may result in devastating consequences and redefine the lives of millions in the Arab world. To me, I always say, I think Israel is under the impression that it's actually fighting a war of liberation of some sort, fighting for the fulfillment of the Zionist project, the original Zionist project. And it is using the events of October the 7th last year to escalate this war that, by the way, has been going on for decades. Watching all the horrors unfold in Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Lebanon, watching the resilience, the resistance and steadfastness of the Palestinian and Lebanese, watching them being abandoned by the world, it's painful. But what is more painful is witnessing the complicity of the Western leadership and the complicity of the Arab world. And I'm saying the Arab world, I'm not trying to be critical of the populations, but this is what we're seeing, unfortunately, and the complicity in this kind of campaign of extermination against the Palestinian resistance, and with it, the Palestinian existence. And it also infuriating to witness the silence of the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank as well, to a certain extent, inside of the state of Israel. How justified is that silence? In a time of extermination, displacement, sexual violence, in industrial scale torture, what is the future of the Palestinian struggle for liberation? And more interestingly, what are the perspectives of the US election results on this struggle? We'll try to unpack and address all these questions today with you, Diana. But before I start, I really want to repeat my gratefulness to you joining up today. And I want to kind of try and set the scene for the questions to come. You're very close to what's unfolding right now back home, by being there and through your interviews, in an effort to spotlight the ongoing suffering of the Palestinians under the Israeli occupation that persisted for decades, through your podcast and your work on the ground. How has this experience been helpful so far? And before you start, Diana, from one Palestinian to another, how have you been? How are you coping with what's happening back home? Especially with what's just unfolded in Washington.
Oh, where do I begin? Well, first, once again, thank you, Ahmed. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for hosting, and thank you for the questions. You asked a lot, so I'm going to try to unpack and describe many things, and then hopefully be able to analyze some things as well. So let's start with how I'm coping. I'm coping the way that you're coping, and the way that everybody around the world is coping. We want to scream. Our screams can't be heard. We are crying all the time. Our tears don't seem to matter. We are feeling incredible pain. We feel guilty for doing simple things in life, like drinking water, or taking a shower, or having a cup of coffee, or laughing, or any of the things that we should not at all be feeling guilty about. We feel guilty about them because we are not trapped in Gaza, and so many of our friends and families and loved ones and our people are. And at the same time, we are, as much as we're trying to do and change things, we vacillate between this feeling of extreme helplessness to a feeling of extreme pride in the fact that there is people who are still continuing to defy the odds, because that's what we do. We defy the odds. That's what people around the world who are facing extermination do, is they try to do everything possible to defy the odds. So that's how I am, but I want to take it a step further so that you understand, or so that I can explain, not you understand, I know you understand this, so that I can explain what it's like to live here in Haifa. So I am, as you already put in the introduction, I was born in Canada and raised in Canada. I moved to Palestine many, many, many years ago, and I currently reside in Haifa. I'm a Palestinian who holds 48 citizenship, and so I have the ability to live inside, and I choose to live inside because I resist and I refuse to have this mindset that I'm going to abandon this space and leave it for them. I refuse to buy into the mindset that it's so much easier for me to live in Ramallah, and it is so much easier for me to live in Ramallah, and instead find comfort living there and not having to deal and work and live with Israelis. I reject that because that's exactly what the Zionists want, is that they want us to be putting ourselves into these little ghettos, because it's, that's the logic. It's so much more comfortable over there. So what does it mean that what is it like living here? And this is going to pivot to your question about the silence. I live in a place where genocide is cool. And what do I mean by that? I live in a neighborhood that is predominantly Palestinian. And even though it's a predominantly Palestinian neighborhood, I do have Jewish Israeli neighbors who have interesting bumper stickers. One bumper sticker is the most popular one, is one that reads, "Together we will succeed." Another very popular bumper sticker is one that says, "Finish them." Now, these are people who've deliberately chosen to live in an Arab neighborhood in Haifa, and living in this, deliberately choosing to live in an Arab neighborhood and put these bumper stickers on the back of your car. It's showing you a mindset. And so I've had many a conversation with Israelis about these bumper stickers and about other things as well, which I'll talk about. And so when I speak to them, the conversation usually is something like this: "Hey, why do you have a bumper sticker that says, 'Together we will succeed'? What does together look like?" And they devolve into this like condescending, "Oh, we're going to teach you Hebrew," as though I don't speak the language. "We're going to teach you Hebrew, and we're going to translate for you that, together means you and me, and succeed means we're going to win." And when I probe them further and say, like, I get the Hebrew part, but we're not together. I don't believe in genocide. And what does win look like? And when I probe further and say, there are, at the time, the last conversation I had, I said to one of my neighbors, there are 10,000, it's now much higher, unfortunately, 10,000 kids that have been killed. It's now 13,000 kids that have been killed. The response is, that's the price. And these are people who, and then she went on to say, "If you have a problem, take it up with the Hamas complaints department." These are people who are self-described left-wing. I don't live in the crazies section. These are the self-described left-wingers who've chosen to live in an Arab neighborhood in Haifa. And so there's what I call genocide fever has overtaken the country. It's always been there, but it's now really like swept through the country. You see this "Together we will succeed" sign everywhere. If you open up pretty much any commercial website, you see "Together we will succeed." You go to the train station, you see "Together we will succeed." You go to any place, you'll see "Together we will succeed." You go and buy eggs, and on the eggs, where they stamp the expiry date, at the top of it is written "Together we will succeed." And it's not just this like signs everywhere, it's an actual mindset. And so now, when living here, you see that there's this flurry of TikToks. Some of the TikToks that you all see are just a fraction of the TikToks that we see. The TikToks that we see TikToks of people dedicating the blowing up of houses to their spouses, dedicating the blowing up of a school to their child. Save the date written inside of Palestinian homes. We see men all the time. I don't know what their obsession is in women's lingerie. Like they're totally obsessed. They need help. We see them bragging about what it's like to run bulldozers over people and see the bodies squirt. We hear them bragging about the thousands of houses that they have that they've smashed. There's one TikToker who's so famous here. He's on the news all the time, where his thing is that he goes into houses inside Gaza and he like assesses the quality of the wood in the kitchen before then taking a sledgehammer and smashing it into pieces. And nobody asks the question, why are you doing this? If you look at Tinder and all of those, apps, the #1 picture is to be wearing your army stuff. The top 6 songs at one point in time on the top 10 list were genocidal songs. One of them has 30 million views. And that's not just, Netanyahu on like repeat on YouTube, right? These are like 30 million people have
out there in the world as well. Yeah. I
I
mean,
think that's cool. It was actually on Billboard's top Hanukkah songs. All right. So these are people. And by the way, this is the important part, Ahmed. It's not just that they're doing it. It's that they're not masked. They're not changing their names. They're full out in the open. And they're saying to you and they're saying to me, we can do whatever we want to do. And in a way, they're right. So like they've gotten, it's cool. It's cool now to be genocidal. It's cool to be somebody who's genocidal. So I live next to these people, just in the same way that my parents lived, because they lived in 48, they lived next to the people who were the perpetrators of the Nakba deniers, or the Nakba apologists, right? This is what's happening in this society here.
I mean, we also saw the demonstrations, outside the prisons to calling for, allowing the rape of Palestinian prisoners to be legal, to be made legal.
Correct, literally rioting for the right to rape Palestinian prisoners. So I'm living in a place where it's totally genocidal, and as a Palestinian living inside, there's you're always under constant surveillance and suspicion. So, for example, on October the 7th of 2023, a very famous Palestinian singer who I know went to Australia, Dalal Abu Amne, she posted on Facebook, La ghalib illallah, there is no victor but Allah, but God. And with a little Palestinian emoji flag. And immediately she started to get death threats for that, La ghalib illallah. She reported the death threats to the Israeli police. And instead of the Israeli police going after the people who were threatening her with death, they arrested her. They threw her in prison for 3 days. Now, many people heard about this, but people didn't hear about the aftermath of it. The aftermath of it was when she got released, they kept the charges hanging over her for months and months and months. And for 161 days, there were protests in front of her house, calling for her to be raped, calling for her to be expelled. The mayor ran his entire campaign, re-election campaign, on getting her kicked out of the city. They cut off her water supply. They cut off her electricity supply. They brought in a big garbage dumpster in front of her house and dumped dead animals in front of her house. They played music 24 hours a day from big loudspeakers. And this went on for 161 days, all for La ghalib illallah. That horrible statement, La ghalib illallah.
It doesn't even have Palestine word in it. I mean, yeah.
Anything in it. It had nothing. Then there was a lawyer who was imprisoned. Then there was Maisa Abdel Hadi, who was thrown in prison, who still is under house arrest. Then there was a Palestinian teacher who did a TikTok video of like, today's going to be a good day, who gets thrown in prison. So you're always under this level of scrutiny and suspicion that anything that you say or do puts you in their camp and that you're therefore the threat. And so there, we saw that in the aftermath, 122 students were expelled or disciplined from university for Facebook and Instagram posts. Now, this part is important. Ahmed, the people who were doing who were reporting this to the schools and to the universities, it wasn't the school. It wasn't the school going through and, sleuthing through your Facebook or your Instagram or your TikTok. It was your classmates. It was the people who are in your study group. It was your coworkers. And so when I tell you when you ask me what is it like to live here, you're living with people who are totally genocidal, who are focused on you all the time, who have set up militias. There's militias now throughout the city of Haifa that are routinely monitoring people. They monitored me, they've doxed me, they've published my home address, my phone number, my home phone number, my son's school. All of it is there. I've been received so many complaints to the police, all for just doing what I'm doing with you right now, right? And so you ask what it's like to live here, and you see that you're living in a place where it's genocidal, where it's where at the trigger you're immediately suspected of all sorts of like criminal activity, where you're being surveilled constantly, where your colleagues and your fellow classmates are after you. And so you're left feeling completely and totally vulnerable. And that just in the same way that this community was completely and totally vulnerable in the aftermath of the Nakba, this is a community that's completely vulnerable in the aftermath of not even aftermath, during this period of genocide. So this is why you've seen so much silence on the part of Palestinians here. One is demonstrations have been outlawed, but two, people are rightfully afraid that if they say anything, that if they do anything, that they'll be turned into they'll be sacrificed. They'll be arrested. They'll be thrown in jail. All sorts of things will happen to them. And you know what? They're not wrong, Ahmed. They're not wrong. The only reason that I'm able to continue doing what I'm doing is because, as I said, I'm the privileged of the privileged of the privileged. I have another citizenship, which is Canada. I don't work with Israelis. I don't have Israeli colleagues. I don't work in an Israeli company. But even then, they've come after me. Even then, they've come after me. So you can imagine what it's like for people who are school teachers or doctors or you name it, where the society has gone after them. That's inside 48. What's it like in the West Bank? In the West Bank, it's terrifying.
But before you go to the West Bank, Diana, I'm just wondering, like, this appalling behavior of the Israeli society, has it always been like this, or has it shifted with the shifting of the recent governments from wherever they were, I mean, center all into the right? Because we know there's no left in the Israeli politics now. Has the society been impacted? I mean, was it behaving in a different way towards the Palestinians before? I mean, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago?
Yes and no. So 10 and 15 years. So look, there's never been an Israeli left wing. I think if anybody who tells you there's an Israeli left wing just does not understand Israeli politics. There's never been. Building and expanding settlements, dispossessing Palestinians, having discriminatory laws against Palestinians is the foundation of the state. The only way that you can, that this state was formed and could continue was through dispossession of Palestinians. And the only way you can dispossess is if you, like when people talk about dehumanization now, yes, there's a ton of dehumanization now, but I want you to think back to 1948. How is it that a person can come in and steal another's land, or literally live in their house, eat off of their dishes, use their fork and spoon, unless they dehumanize them? So the whole foundation of the state is it's based on dehumanization. And it's always been racist. It's always been fascist. Just this time with this particular government, it's become so normalized. So just in the same way that racism in Australia and Canada and America and wherever, it's always been there. And it's the ha ha ha, you know, the whisper, whisper, whisper. With this particular government, it's no longer whispering. It's totally out loud. And so much so, that's why if you watch any of these Israeli politicians or even the Israeli youth or the TikTok, I mean, they don't have a filter that says, hey, maybe we shouldn't be saying this, because it's been so normalized. Like it's been so normalized for them to just say, yes, kill them all. That's how, that's what's happened. So has it always been around? Yes. But now it's just become that much more open and that much more normalized. And one thing that's fascinating is that if you look at public opinion polls across the globe, youth tend to be more left-wing in their outlook. It's the older people that are more conservative, except among Israeli youth. Israeli youth are incredibly right-wing, and they're incredibly right-wing because this is their norm. This is their norm. And it's just gotten like successively worse over the years. But I wanted to, so you asked about 48. I'm going to talk a little bit about the West Bank and Gaza. I'm going to talk about the West Bank leadership, and then I'm going to talk about Trump.
Yes, perfect. I mean, you're doing the work for me. Yes, exactly. I was just gonna provide a small comment.
So I wanted to.
I was just gonna give a small comment on this system of indoctrination inside Israel. I think the IDF is the biggest organizational system of indoctrination of those Israelis from the outside and from the inside. So it's like a filter that the youth have to go through in order to get their understanding of even their Jewishness, not just being an Israeli. I mean, I was listening to a podcast by Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, I think, and he was talking in length about how the IDF is an organization of, you know, indoctrination. But yeah, sorry, please. Cool.
What's it like in the West Bank? So West Bank, I go to the West Bank often. I was just there 2 days ago. It's terrifying, and it's terrifying for a number of reasons. One is there's a few plans that have been set up over the course of the past year. The first is that around each and every Palestinian city, town, village, there is now a gate or a block. This is different from the way that it was in the years 2000 to 2004. This is much more, it's everywhere. And some of it is automated, meaning that with the press of a button or through your phone, you can open the gate, you can close the gate. Not me, Army. It's become like a very automated occupation. At the same time, you've got the Israelis who have been building new bypass roads to quite literally bypass Palestinian towns and to connect the settlements to one another and connect those settlements into 48. Why is this important? Because this government has been talking, endlessly about annexation. And it's already de facto annexed, which I can talk about, but I'm not sure how much people want me to go into that. But now they're making it so that it's physically that way, so that all that they can do is, as I said, with, you know, your little smartphone, with whatever, press a button, you can totally shut down every Palestinian town and have complete and total free passage for the Israeli settlers. At the same time, we've seen that the Israeli settlers have gone on a rampage. They've created WhatsApp groups where they are publishing the coordinates of where Palestinians are in the olive harvest so that they can go in and terrorize them. And especially in those the olive groves where they're close to settlements, the policy has been to go after Palestinians who are picking olives during the harvest, so as to send them the message of like, who is boss. Over the course of the past year, have been over 700 Palestinians that Israel has killed, Israeli settlers and soldiers have killed. Add to that the systematic attack on the refugee camps and on UNRWA in particular. And the closure of UNRWA, there's a lot of things that have been said, but there's a lot that hasn't been said. UNRWA is one of the biggest providers of education and of healthcare services and of financial services. People literally live off of their food coupons. With that collapsed, because Israel has collapsed it, it's a big question as to what's going to happen to these hundreds of thousands of people who are relying on this in the West Bank. We'll talk about Gaza in just a second. And so you can see that systematically it's this attempt. There's another thing that's happened, which is the Israelis are refusing to, they're trying to collapse the Palestinian financial system. And so all three things combined with the withholding of money to the PA, the fact that there are no jobs, the fact they can close down Palestinian cities, towns, and villages in a heartbeat, the fact that there are all these bypass roads, the fact that we see Israeli settlers and soldiers going after Palestinians, the fact that we've seen the increased settlement construction over the course of the past year, the fact there's going after UNRWA. You can see exactly what it is that the Israelis are trying to do and how difficult it has been for Palestinians over the course of the past year. It's a completely changed place over the course of the past year because of these repeated Israeli policies to try to choke off Palestinians. And this brings in the point, then I'm going to speak about Gaza and then I'll get to the leadership. In Gaza, you know, what can I say that hasn't already been said? The fact that we're on day 396 of genocide, the fact that we've seen ICJ opinion after ICJ opinion, the fact that we've heard about these arrest warrants that are supposed to be issued but haven't been issued yet, the fact that we're seeing the extermination of Palestinians in the north with the three choices that they're facing, which is flee, be killed, or starve. And now it's no longer flee, be killed, or starve. Now the choices are starve or be killed. It's no longer flee. That you can see exactly what is going on there with Israel destroying between 70 and 80% of houses. The fact they've attacked virtually 30 of 36 hospitals. Practically all of the universities have been attacked. That UN schools are under attack. The things that we once thought were there's no way they can do, and international law says you can't do them, have been done. The eyes and the ears of the world, whether those eyes and ears are journalists, 180 of them killed, or the eyes and ears being UN staff, 237 killed. It's just, you can see this successive extermination with, and this part is important, a plan on the part of the Israelis to actually resettle Gaza. You know, I started off by talking about the signs that I see here, the finish them and the together we will succeed. The third most popular sign here, there's also the signs about the hostages, which I'll talk about as well if you're interested. But the third most popular sign is one that reads, and this is in Haifa, resettle Gaza now. This is in Haifa, resettle Gaza now. So I say this because it goes to the question of leadership. Having spent plenty of time with European diplomats, Australian diplomats, Canadian diplomats, American diplomats, they're going to do whatever it is that the plan that's put in by Israel. And Israel's created its plan. They created their plan from the first week of October of 2023. The second week, they said Gaza will be smaller in size, thinner in population, and there will be settlements. And we don't have in the West Bank any Palestinian leadership that is putting forward any different proposal or any different vision that other than one that is rejecting it, which I understand why they're rejecting it. But they also haven't put forward a concrete proposal of what should be done about Gaza. All they keep talking about is ceasefire, which is very important. I want to stress this is very important, but there needs to be a lot more than that. And nobody's talking about UNRWA. Nobody's talking about it, about what's happening to the people who are, to education, to any of the aspects of actual life. It's just not happening. And instead, given that there are clear Israeli plans to resettle Gaza, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's precisely what.
I think that plan, the general's plan, is what it's been referred to now. It was Noor Arakat was mentioning the other day that it was actually competing with the plan of withdrawal in 2005 that Sharon actually implemented. And it basically, it's not like it came out of nowhere because of October the 7th. It actually was existing in the back end of, you know, the Israeli government. And now it's just a continuation of you know, colonization Palestine, pretty much.
Not quite. So the plan predates 2005, and it hasn't actually linked to the disengagement. It predates by a lot. You know, these were plans that were drawn up in the 70s, where the thought was that if you could create these little islands and pump them with economic well-being, that there wouldn't be any resistance. This was actually Shimon Peres. That was his ideology, was take as much land, create these little islands, create a good population, and then there won't be any resistance. And it's been shown time and again that doesn't work because people want their land back. But beyond that, it's a kind of a sick way of thinking that, you know, people don't, that we can just buy people off and it's all about economics, and it's not about historic injustice, not about land, etc. And so this is a plan that's been in the works for years. Now, this general's plan right now, I think that what they're implementing on the ground is actually even worse than the general's plan, because the general's plan calls for evacuation. This isn't, what we're seeing right now is not evacuation at all.
It's an extermination, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, and then you asked about what does this mean for the US election?
I really want to ask about when it comes to the West Bank, really. I mean, does the elephant in the room in the West Bank, does the Palestinian Authority still represent the Palestinians? I mean, or has it actually, I mean, we can see evidence of that. Has it become an accomplice of the occupation? I mean, what's its role? I mean, it's actually not even condemning what the Israelis are doing in Gaza anymore.
They are, so I'm going to try to be a little bit on the, you know, accurate. They do come out and speak out against what the Israelis are doing. But the Palestinian Authority has long been an arm of the Israeli occupation. It's not just, this isn't just apparent now. It's been for decades. How? Because, you know, I don't know about the people who are on the call. I don't know how basic I should get into talking about the Palestinian Authority, but I'll say it in a few lines. So the Palestinian Authority was established in the 90s for a 5-year period. That was it. It wasn't supposed to last beyond 5 years. It's soon going to be 30. It's already been 30 years. With this president in January, it will be 20 years for him. He was elected for a 4-year term. This January will be 20 years for him. Why am I mentioning this? Because if you think about like anything that you're supposed to have for only 5 years and you stretch it out to 30, there's no way that it has the same utility 30 years later. And it's the same of the Palestinian Authority. And so people bought into the idea of the Palestinian Authority. And please don't believe the revisionists who say the vast majority of Palestinians were opposed. They were not. There were people who genuinely were supportive of Oslo because they wanted hope and they thought that it was going to lead to a better future. You know, now I know it's very fashionable for everybody to say, oh, I was opposed from the beginning. That wasn't the case. That really wasn't the case. I told you my aim is to be accurate. And And so there were people who were very supportive of the PA because they thought it was going to be a 5-year project. It's no longer a 5-year project. It's now, it's morphed into its own body. And as its own body, the only way that it survives is through the will of the international community, and in particular through the will of Israel. If Israel's happy with it, it survives. If Israel's not happy with it, it does its best to bring it down. And so it's always playing this game of withholding money to the PA, and then the donors then push back. And so it's like this game all the time. And the number one thing that the PA does, which is an arm of the occupation, is it's the security subcontractor. And being the security subcontractor, what that means is that if the Israelis want somebody, they send that name through to the PA, and the PA does the arresting, right? And that has not stopped. It has not stopped over since the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, since the first set of elections 30 years ago. So it is an arm of it. How about today? Today, when you look at public opinion polls, support for the PA is at an all-time low. They want something different. They want to see something different. And the problem is that as much as people want to see something different, the PA has built in these structures to make it so that they are indispensable, or so they think they are. So everything from paying the salaries of 150,000 people, multiply that by the average family size of 5, you're looking at a huge level of economic control over the lives of people. They do that also by making sure that there is no real dissent, and they actually crush dissent. Now, there's some ways that you can work, but for the most part, they crush dissent. And so people don't see that there is an alternative to the Palestinian Authority. And so you're in this weird space where public opinion polls will tell you that they're unhappy with the PA, but at the same time, they don't see a vision that is separate and apart from the PA, because the PA hasn't thought through it, and they don't let another one actually develop. That's the part that's terrifying for me, Ahmed. That's the part that's terrifying.
It is terrifying because, I mean, we've been reading about all these efforts of unity, if you will, between Hamas, Fatah, and all these factions, and most of those efforts actually failed, predominantly because of the occupation and everything that's happening. But I want to veer, yeah.
To be honest, also because of Abu Mazen. You know, the number one, before October of last year, if you polled Palestinians about the top few issues, the number one issue was the lack of unity. Number 2 issue was lack of personal security. The number 3 issue was occupation, which is tied into the number 2 issue, right? So you're looking at that people are demanding and saying to Abu Mazen, we want national unity. And instead of him pursuing one of the many national unity agreements that his own faction signed on to, he did everything to blow it out of the water, including this last one in Beijing.
And it's interesting because the contingency always was the concept of resistance. It's just Fatah or the PA has always refused to maintain that aspect of resistance to occupation and succumb or capitulate to some sort of a semi-governance between Gaza Strip and West Bank, which Hamas never agreed to. I mean, understandably so, kind of. Maybe
it was in some cases even more basic than that, more sort of base level than that. It was the question of control, who controls, who doesn't control. And yeah, and it's like, look, the West put forward their conditions for how it is that the Palestinian Authority is going to get money. And it was based on the quartet conditions. And the quartet conditions are, and the quartet being the US, the EU, Russia, and the UN. And if you look at just those 4 bodies, you can see that it's already kind of disproportionate, right? Like the EU does whatever the US does. The UN is the compendium of the collection of the member states, which is really the US. So you've got like, kind of a absurdly weighted in favor of US policy, i.e. Israeli policy. And so when you look at what those conditions were, the conditions were recognition of Israel and the renunciation of violence. And yet, if I look at Israel, Israel's never recognized Palestine. Israel's never renounced violence. And so because of that, like Abu Mazen is kind of holding on to these quartet conditions because he knows he's weak, and so he realizes that he needs the West. But at the same time, it's been long enough that he could have been turning his sights to the East and not necessarily relying just on European funding, not necessarily relying on US funding, but instead creating a different model that isn't as dependent on Israel as we are now. When I look around now and see that Palestinian banks are saying that they're on the verge of collapse because they're overextended and because Israel is refusing to sign this indemnification agreement with to indemnify Palestinian banks and Israeli banks, you can see that just this control that Israel has on Palestinians by the neck. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I remember Netanyahu made that comment or statement a few years back that he will never negotiate with a government that is Hamas is part of. So basically that ruins all efforts for unity anytime soon. I really want to expand the conversation and take it to the more wider context. I mean, we just saw that what happened in Washington. I just want to ask, maybe I'm being a bit pessimistic or something. I mean, will Israel and its allies eventually succeed in normalizing this greater Israel regime of apartheid from the river to the sea? I mean, what is the potential of stopping that? I mean, now Trump has taken, almost kind of, he will. The White House, is he going to continue the efforts of normalizing with Israeli, with other Arab countries, peace agreements and so on and so forth? I mean, what's the future look like? And before you answer, Diana, I just want to encourage everyone to kind of start putting their questions in, so that we can try and answer as much as we can from them.
But the answer depends on us. Okay, I refuse to give in to the politics of despair, because it's easy. That's an easy job, is to feel despair, and I refuse to. And so what do I mean by that? Look, the Arab states are certainly going to try to normalize with Israel, or vice versa, because this is something that Trump is going to be pushing. Why is Trump pushing it? Because the people who are around him want to see this happen. And so the Arab states are, they're certainly an incentive to try to normalize and to forget Palestinians, just in the same way that there was an incentive to try to normalize and to normalize and forget Palestinians on the part of the UAE, Bahrain, and others. But the bigger issue is whether we're going to allow them to get away with it. And we have now, we have the tools to be pushing back against Israel. And this is in the form of a number of ICJ rulings just over the course of the past year, that, for those who don't, international law sounds like a mystery. It's not. International law is not self-executing, meaning that it's not something that states are going to naturally do on their own. It requires the effort of other states as well. So we have a ruling by the ICJ that came out in January that says that there's a plausible case for genocide. You should be putting each and every one of your countries, every country should be put on notice by lawyers that if they continue to supply weapons to Israel, they are also at risk of aiding and abetting genocide, and that there's a price to pay for that. That's number one. Number two is, we have a decision that came out on July the 19th of this year that says that each and every one of the settlements has to go bye-bye. Each one and every one of the settlers has to go bye-bye. And that countries should not be aiding or facilitate or recognizing this occupation. that they shouldn't be doing anything that can be seen as that. They have to separate their policies in relation to the West Bank and in relation to 48. And here's the kicker. The ruling also pertains to Jerusalem. And because it pertains to Jerusalem, we have to be working to make sure that everything, to make sure that your capitals can't, your capitals don't recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, number one. Number two, that we have to be pushing to make sure that they're completely ostracizing the occupation. That number three, there's no trade agreement with Israel because Israel has not separated, right? It hasn't there's no special, like, how do I put this? If I'm driving around in the West Bank, there isn't a special banking law that applies to businesses that are in the West Bank, that are in like the settlements in the West Bank. The same stores that are in Haifa can be found in the malls in Ariel. The same thing can be found in the malls of Ma'ale Adumim. And so because Israel hasn't separated, right, it's always viewed it as one. If Israel refuses to separate, and it will, then the next response is that Australia, Canada, the United States shouldn't have a free trade agreement at all, because there's no way that we can implement that portion of the ICJ ruling of having distinction when Israel's not creating a distinction, right? So these are the things that we have to be pushing for within our own countries. Next, how is it that, and I saw there was a question on this, how is it that soldiers are allowed to continue to be in the Israeli army? I don't call it the IDF because there's a D in there and it's certainly not defending anybody. How is it that they're allowed to be in the Israeli army? And again, this is something that requires you all to combine and to push and to try to legislate and to pass, because it shouldn't be allowed that these soldiers, and we know their faces, we know their names, we know their faces. They're not shy. They are not shy.
They've been exposed actually by an organization. Some of them have gone traveling, even here in Australia and Sydney. They've been spotted in Melbourne taking photos.
Exactly. And so this is where our work begins. I refuse to buy into the politics of despair. I just refuse to. I can be like everybody else and just say, oh, there's nothing to be done. Let's just, but I refuse. That's what resistance is about. It's refusing in your own way to accept the dictates of an illegal occupying force. And so we have to do this. We have to do this. And we can't just give in to there's bigger parties, the parties that are bigger than us. No, we have to continue to work on this. There's other things that we can do, which is, we continue, when I look at the way in which the media has been reporting on Palestine, what? Are we in the same planet? All right. And again, it's this idea that it's commonplace to dehumanize. It's okay to dehumanize because they've gotten so used to it that we have to keep pushing back on that as well. And so, yes, Trump got elected. I always say, people deserve the government that they elect, but the Americans might deserve Trump, but we certainly don't. And so Trump got elected. And believe me, this is the golden opportunity for the Zionists now. They have a new president or former president, whatever, who is a convicted felon, who is angry, who wants to do who will do whatever possible to make sure that he never sees a day in prison. We have similarly a prime minister here who is a fascist, who's genocidal, who will do everything possible to make sure that he never sees the inside of a prison. And the Zionists are now viewing this as a great opportunity to push forward to this view of not only greater Israel, but of the complete finish them of Palestinians. And when you hear the news here, where I'm telling you, it's become so normalized that people are now talking about occupying Lebanon up until just south of Beirut, where they're talking about resettling, you know, it sounds so innocuous, like recolonizing Gaza. And they talk about the plans that they have. You know, some of the commentators are saying, they said the other day, you know, if they were the king of Jordan, they wouldn't be planning on a succession plan, right? If they were, you know, so this is stuff that's being openly talked about. They have their plans, and if we don't have our plans of how to stop them, they're gonna succeed. They're gonna succeed.
And I think this sentiment has been built in the Israeli society for decades and decades, and accelerated over the past 10, 15 years. I think, you know, in terms of these news channels that are propagating this ultra-Orthodox, extreme concepts against the Palestinians, they get most of the funding from the government. So it's intentional that they are building this society and preparing it for this moment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When you see that in Haifa, again, I keep referring to Haifa because it's what they call the city of coexistence, which is not. I call it subexistence. But when you look at a city like Haifa, Haifa is it's the quote unquote mixed city that has among the highest populations of Palestinians. The Palestinians who live here tend to be in the higher socioeconomic class. They tend to be doctors, lawyers, engineers. Like they've gravitated to Haifa. They're not actually originally from Haifa. And when you see in a place like Haifa, signs like finish them, together we'll succeed, and it's time to resettle Gaza, it gives you a flavor of what it's like in places like Jerusalem, which is where I was yesterday, where you openly see signs that say agreement equals surrender, and like an agreement to end or ceasefire. Ceasefire equals surrender. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not really surprised. I mean, we've been
No.
seeing, yeah, we've been seeing that develop over the years. I've got so many questions, but I don't want to be greedy. I just want to open it up to the Q&A. I've got a question here regarding the surrounding countries of the region, talking about Iran, Syria. I mean, what is the likelihood of the surrounding states, like Iran, Syria, Yemen, attacking Israel? It seems as though Netanyahu has been daring them to do this.
Yeah, he is. He is, because he's daring them because he knows that he can do whatever he wants, right? You know, if a firecracker makes it across the border, that it'll give him license. It'll give Netanyahu license to pummel each and every of these countries, and he has. I mean, the devastation. That one of the terrifying things about living in Haifa is, particularly where I live, is that I can see and hear the fighter jets all the time, and they're going in the two directions, right? So I know, like, every time I hear one, I just think, oh God, I just know something. Like, I'm going to turn on the news in 15 minutes and something terrible will have happened, and Israel will have bombed a hospital or a school in Gaza. And in the other direction, it's like, oh God, I just know they're doing the same in Lebanon. And the exporting of the tactics that they've used in Gaza to Lebanon and soon to the West Bank is, and being allowed to get away with it. That's the part that is, that's the most disheartening of all this. So yes, the countries are reading this, and they're recognizing that Netanyahu is trying to egg them on. Yeah.
We had Shir Hever the other day, and we had a conversation with him about his opinion on how the economical situation in Israel is faring. There's a question here, with the funds running low and the economy is collapsing in Israel, will the developments stop? I mean, is that going to make any contribution to stopping the war eventually?
No, No, there seems to be an open trough, money trough coming from the United States. Look, I'll break it down a little bit simpler. I agree with Sheer. I agree with Sheer. I agree when he's he doesn't live here. I live here, and so I can tell you just on the basis of what it's like here now. It's very expensive, hugely expensive. And it already was beforehand, by the way. Number two is there are people who are leaving, and you can go on any of the like used cars or real estate sites, and you often see people selling their house with their car, or you see them selling a completely furnished house. That means they're leaving. This is not like we're buying bigger or whatever, no, we're permanently relocating. Number three is we've already seen that if you look at there's government structures here that track the number of people who've left the country. The official number is 40,000 that have left. That's the official number. But the unofficial number is certainly much higher. And the reason that I'm saying that there's official versus unofficial is that that official number is people who've actually told the state that they're leaving and not coming back, which means that they end their contributions to the health insurance, the National Health Insurance Plan. Other people still keep paying into the National Health Insurance Plan, or they refuse to stop paying, period. But they happen to be outside. But these are people who've actually notified the national the health service plan that they've left, right? And that number is 40,000. But then you even see it even more. There's been thousands of businesses that have closed down. This week, the Israelis are promoting what's it called? The Israel Business Week, where they're flooding ads on YouTube to try to get Israelis to buy from Israeli companies. If you go to any of the markets, you can see that the tradition, the places that one would normally have seen goods from, whether Turkey or otherwise, don't exist any longer. To try buying an air conditioning unit here, the only company is an Israeli one. And so you can see that the impact that this is having. You can also see that it's having an impact on people in terms of attrition. The Israelis are just not used to this. They're used to living a very Western lifestyle, overextended, living off of credit, and that's just not possible any longer. So there is definitely a war of attrition in terms of economics and otherwise, having them feel they're always in a war. Will that mean that the country is going to collapse? I'm not so sure, because there seems to be there's an open check from the US to be able to fund things. I don't know how open of a check it is, but it seems to be that fund is certainly there. For example, we have not seen that the price of gasoline has skyrocketed, even though by all indicators it should have skyrocketed by this point in time. Right?
That's really interesting to hear the inside of what's happening inside Israel. I do have a question here about the poor leadership of Arab countries. Who do you look up to for help, in terms of all these countries normalizing relationship with Israel? I mean, who is there to support the Palestinians? I mean, apart from Axis of Resistance, which is already demonized in the West. I mean, who we do look to for help? People.
People. This idea that somehow states are going to liberate us, it's a fallacy. No, I look to you. I genuinely believe that we are the majority. We're the majority in terms of support. We're the majority in terms of world consciousness. As much as the United States is supporting, I call it the axis of genocide, by the way. As much as the US is part of the axis of genocide, that's the US government. I just don't, the American people are not. The Australian people are not. This is not, the people in Europe are not. And so I look to you, and look, if you look at the country that's probably done the most over the course of the past year, it's South Africa, right? Now, you have to ask yourself, why is it that South Africa got so involved in Palestine? And it was because Palestinians had been so intrinsic to the anti-apartheid struggle, right? We've been so much part of that struggle. So there was no state of Palestine back then. It's people who do the pushing. It's people who do the who do the support. And that's why I keep saying, like, we don't have the luxury of just sitting back and watching and being observers to world politics. We have to be the ones who are shaping it.
Absolutely. I mean, you say you, the people of the West, the Western society. What about the Arab society? I mean, are they helpful? Are they helping? Are they trying to help? I mean, you mentioned that you mentioned that system of oppression and in the West Bank and inside Israel. Does that mean that the silence of the people inside the West Bank and is justified?
No, of course not. Look, we have an obsession with the Arab world. And I think the obsession with the Arab world is that they're the same language, same culture, same religion, or for the most part, same religion. They're not the ones who are funding this genocide. They're not the ones funding the genocide. Let's keep our eyes on the people who are funding the genocide and who are actively supporting it. Should the Arab states be doing more? Absolutely, of course they can. They can, but the question is what, right? What more can they do when you have a Western power that is saying we're gonna see this through to its end? Like, what more is it that they are, how do they confront this beast? And so I think the big thing is we have to keep our eyes on the axis of genocide, and we have to stop the flow of weapons from the axis of genocide to the genocidal state. The rest of it, yes, we have a lot of support in the Arab world. I've been to many countries over the course of the past year, and the support is there. At the same time, I look around, I think, they're not living a great life either, in the sense that speech is suppressed. You go to places like, there's different countries where you're not allowed to say anything about Palestine. Those countries where you are allowed to say things about Palestine, the repression by the state is huge. Look at Jordan, for example. And so when I look at where is my energy going to go, yes, I will get to the Arab states, but my energy now is on stopping Israel from killing more Palestinians. And the way that you do that is you stop the axis of genocide and you put into place mechanisms to make sure that that axis of genocide stops. Can more be done in Jordan? Absolutely. I still don't know why it is that Jordan is allowing supplies to come in through Jordan. Can more be done in the UAE? Absolutely. I still don't understand why they've maintained this lovey-dovey affair with Israel, particularly in light of Israel's bombing of the World Central Kitchen, the killing of the people from the World Central Kitchen. Like, all of that makes, but right now my energy is focused on those who are doing the killing.
Thanks, Diana. There's a question here that says, what steps can we take in the West to build an organization that can be strong enough to combat the influence of the Zionist lobby here and kind of enforce and help enforce international law?
Okay, so I can't really speak to all of the countries because I actually don't know them. How do I begin? I can speak to the two countries that I know the most, and sadly, Australia's not one of them. You can probably speak to that. Let me talk about the United States. I think that this idea of like taking on the Israel lobby is a waste of time. I really do. It's like it's arm wrestling with a gorilla, and we'll never win on that. And so I don't put my energy into that level of it. I think instead that if you look at the ways in which there has been change, the United States is the last country to change, it's not the first country to change. So look at South Africa. When what change happened throughout all of the world, and the last two countries to change were Britain and the United States, last being the United States. So the question is that I don't think that we should ignore it, but I don't think that putting our money and our effort and our energy into creating an anti-APAC, I don't think that that's going to, I don't think that's personally a good use of time or money. I think that educating people, getting people to make those connections between, for example, the Israel lobby and the coal lobby, between the Israel lobby and the gun lobby, because there are connections. I think that that's important and wise, but I don't think like taking on the big beast of APAC, I don't think that's going to work. One, because APAC is so entrenched, and then two, APAC is really just a reflection of US foreign policy. That's it. It's not, I mean, there are people who disagree with me, like Ambassador Chas-Friedman, and they'll say, no, this is all about congressional politics. And I might be wrong, but this isn't the way that I've ever seen it or analyzed it. It doesn't matter who has been in the White House, the policy has been the same over the years, including under Obama. So I think I think instead we have to be working on these other places and making it costly for Israel. And we can do it. We can make all sorts of things costly for them on a commercial level. We can make all sorts of things costly for them in countries around the world. Even just like, for example, it's one thing that you'll be surprised how to resonated inside Israel. Maldives said that they weren't going to allow Israeli tourists to come into the Maldives. There are not a whole lot of tourists that go from Israel to the Maldives. Maldives is a small country, and there aren't a ton of them. That had it resonated more than anything else. Why? Because it got to the mindset of Israel, and it made them feel like they are not welcome, and that that their country is not normal. That's the stuff that we have to be working on. At the same time, within your own countries, as I already mentioned at the top of the talk, things like pushing for legislation to be able to have the ICJ ruling implemented. This is not optional. This is required. Pushing for things in relation to genocide. Again, not optional. These are required. These are the things that can and should be done. And it doesn't require us to take on like, congressional seats in the United States or voting in Canada or whatever. The other country that I know very well is Canada. You'll be shocked to know Canada is just as Zionist, if not more, than the United States. I know it looks like nice and polite, and we say sorry and excuse me, and we're very polite, what have you. The people are very polite in their racism. But it's just as racist. And again, I really think that the idea of focusing on congressional districts I just think that that's all wrong. Instead, we have to focus on making it costly for Israel, making it costly for Canada, making it costly for the United States, making it costly for Australia. And believe me, they back off. Like, for example, here's an example to show you the evil the other way. On the day that the ICJ ruling came out, Israel made the allegation against UNRWA, right? Against the 13 people who were, and instantly, right? It didn't even take 10 minutes. We had countries all around the world stop their contributions to UNRWA. Why? Because it's costly for them. Because it's costly for them. And because the instinct of a lawyer is, we have to halt. We've now been put on alert. We have to halt. Then, of course, they now resumed their funding because the allegations were baseless. That's what we have to do when it comes to the Zionists. Put them on alert.
How effective, Diana, Malaysia's proposal to remove Israel from UN?
It's it's not just Malaysia. There's been, if you were following last week, Francesca Albanese in her remarks was mentioning the same. I was asked to do a presentation at the same talk, And it was raised and brought up by a number of people.
I think BDS movement is also initiating this this new
Exactly.
petition, asking people to sign. By the way, it's all up on the social media. Everyone, please sign it and send it and share it.
Exactly. So I think that there is, yeah, of course, the U.S. is going to do everything it can to stop it. But again, just these little things of making Israel feel like it's a pariah state are enough to scare it. Believe me, there will not be any Israelis visiting South Africa over the next few years. Believe me, they won't. They will not do it. And it's just a question of really making them feel that their actions and what they're doing is not acceptable. Because, excuse me, the message that they've been told here is that, you know, genocide is cool. You can do it. You can actually get dates from it. You know, it can boost your social media presence.
I want to ask you a couple of last questions, Diana. I think we've taken too long from your time. What's awaiting Gaza, the West Bank, and Palestine in general? How do you see the future looking like? Are you optimistic?
I think it depends on us. I think it depends on us. I think that, you know, how does the expression go? The arc of history is long, and the arc of justice is also. And at the same time, I have a lot of reason to be concerned. I'm concerned because there is no proper leadership in the West Bank. I'm concerned because there are European countries and perhaps also Australia that is now kind of opening their doors and saying, please come, like, please leave Palestine and come. And people are seriously thinking about it. I'm worried because when there's no real leadership, that leadership can't give a vision to people to say, no, stay. And if there's no real leadership to say stay, then people turn into their individualism, right? And they say, well, maybe Canada is better for me. Maybe Australia is better. Maybe Denmark, maybe wherever. So I'm worried about that. I'm very worried for Gaza. When you think that, when you like hear numbers like 18 years just to remove the rubble, just imagine the devastation that's doing to you psychologically. The drone that they hear 24 hours a day, there's immense hearing loss in Gaza now because of that and because of all the bombs. Imagine with all of that rubble that needs to be removed, imagine the damage that's been done to the environment. And I can tell you, we felt it here this year. Hottest summer on record. It still hasn't rained here. It's imagine what's doing to the food supply. And I really worry for Gaza because I think once Rafah has opened, parents are going to be thinking and saying, oh, I want to educate my kid. The only way I can do so is outside of Gaza. Oh, I need to get medical treatment for my child. And there's these wonderful organizations that are like, oh, let's treat the children. And it's important to treat them. And it is very, very, very important to treat them, especially children who are amputees. I was told that they need somewhere between 12 to 20 surgeries by the time that they're 18 because their bones grow. And so if you're a child needing specialized surgery or a person who needs specialized surgery, it's not going to be happening in Gaza. If you're a person who wants to rebuild their house and not live in a tent, that's not going to be happening in Gaza. If you're a person who wants to get higher education, not just basic education, university, that's not going to be in Gaza. And so I'm terrified for those who leave, and I'm terrified for those who stay. And I'm terrified that that again, we don't have a proper leadership that is telling people, stay. This is what it means. This is what's going to happen. You know, I've had so many friends over the course of the past year who've left. And the odd thing is I wrote an op-ed back in December of 2022. This is before, you know, a year, 10 months before all of this, with the election of this new government. And when I reread it these days, it was in the New York Times in case anybody's interested. It was as though I was like predicting the future because people were telling me they wanted to leave. So all of this to say that I'm really worried about us. And at the same time, we don't have, I'll say this over and over, we don't have the luxury to give in. We just don't. We
No.
have to keep pushing back. And we have to do everything in our power to make sure that Israel doesn't get away with it. We must. For those who believe in the land acknowledgements and those who believe in justice, we are just 200 years, you're 200 years ahead of Israel's 200 years ahead of what they did in Australia. So you have the ability to act now. I don't want people, my great grandchildren, to be doing, to be talking about this as though this was like an inevitable, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Absolutely.
No.
I mean, I share your concerns, Diana. I mean, my family as well, earlier in the genocide, they didn't have that strong sentiment, but at the moment, they just tell me there's nothing left. I mean, the first opportunity that comes, there's no hospital, there's no educational systems, there's no schools, there's no universities. And these are, young youth, my nephews and nieces, they need all this infrastructure and they have all the reason to leave. I mean, I had a conversation with Samah Sabawi. She's a prominent writer here in Australia, and you probably know her. She eventually, after a huge effort, managed to get her family out in Melbourne. But when she was speaking about it, she was actually in deep sadness because there's no one left in Gaza now in her family, which is just a scary thought.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. When you look around and you see that there are more Palestinians that are outside of Palestine than there are in Palestine, you understand that this is what the Zionists have always wanted. And so our aim is to try to keep people here as much as possible. We must, and we must not only keep them here as much as possible, but we must make their lives good so that they can stay here. And the only way that's going to happen is by challenging this axis of genocide. That's it. That's the only way that it's going to happen. It's the Zionist wet dream to have Palestine free of Palestinians. They talk about it every single day. You hear it on their news, on their podcasts, on their this. It's just like it's their fantasy, and we can't give them their fantasy.
No.
We just cannot give them their fantasy. And at the same time, I don't want people to stay in Gaza just for the sake of staying in Gaza. They I want our people whole. I want our people to be the educators, the professors, the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, the artists, the writers, the bakers, the welders, that you name it. I want our society should be whole. And it's just so tragic for me that that we just can't be whole,
What keeps you inspired, Diana? I mean,
Us,
what's happening?
our people, the craziest things. Like just yesterday, a friend of mine from Gaza sent me a little video of a graduation party, a university graduation party, and my mind was blown. What? How? And she said, we have to keep going. We have to keep going. She sent me another video of a friend of hers who is trying to do birthday parties for little kids. Like little, the little kids who everybody should be able to have a birthday party when they're a little kid. And they're making the most out of like nothing to make a birthday party for little kids. The simple things that we take for granted. Just this like just unflinching desire to just have a normal life and to survive, and not just survive, but to thrive. To thrive. That's what gives me hope. And those of us who are outside and those of us who are privileged, myself included, we have to, I'm inside, but I'm privileged. we have to use our privilege to the extent that we can to make sure that everybody else gets the same shot that we get in life, and that they have the ability to live freely in their own land without Zionists like trying to steal every corner, every inch of Palestine and turn it into something gross and disgusting and Israeli that has no connection to the land. Yeah.
It's hard not to delve into these emotional sentiments. I apologize. It's just it's hard to control it sometimes. But I mean, I echo what you just said. We gotta stay hopeful. I mean, hopeful means hopeful, but with action. We need to continue working. We need to continue our pressure and do what we can. We are making a change. People were saying what more we can do to make more changes. I think we are making the changes. It's slow, but we need to push harder. You know, we look at the road ahead and it's dark and gloomy, but I think we continue because of the road behind us. You know, we've gone long enough for us to continue fighting for this cause. I really, really want to thank you very much for this brilliant conversation, Diana. I want to thank everyone also for engaging with us in the questions. I apologize, couldn't address all the questions. I do want to let everyone know that we are recording this session today, and the video will be put on the YouTube channel and will be available and will send out to everyone who's registered. I also want to let everyone know that this webinar was free, only for educational purposes, but people generously donated, and we want to thank them all. I am in touch with a family that is helping orphans and people in northern Gaza, so I am in a certain way sending all the monies and donations to that lady, as well as some refugee Gazan families here in Sydney. I'm also helping out whoever is in need. So I want to thank everyone who's donated. Please give more and help as much as you can. Once more, thank you very much, Diana, for your time, and hopefully we'll have you again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And just one final thing, please do check in on those families that are in Australia. Really, they need so much support now. I just can't imagine what they've witnessed and what they're still witnessing and what they're experiencing, and being in a foreign country all at the same time. So please, you know, I appreciate that you're doing it, and please, I encourage everybody to continue to reach out to them. They're not well. They're not in a good place.
100%. 100%. Thanks, Diana.
Thank
Have
you.
a lovely morning and a great day.
Thank you. I wish you the same. Thank you.
Take care.